Hey everybody, I'm back. I'll be talking about the Mars perspective on human evolution. This is the second episode in the three-part episode of the planets and humans' colonization upon them. And this is out of the book Pleiadian Perspectives on Human Evolution by Amora Kuan Yin. And yeah, I'll just be talking about Mars. It's this is a very deeply resonating lesson for me to teach on, and I definitely have a lot to learn in the realm of anger and that really huge energy of the solar plexus. So yeah, hopefully you guys will enjoy it. Essentially, the colonization of Mars began with souls that were new Venetians. So basically, souls that were incarnating on Venus that passed away or whatever would incarnate on Mars, and they would learn the lessons that they needed to learn there. And within their psyches and subconscious, the new Venetians incarnating on Mars had a deep sense of not being a part of the connection that Venus represents. Like relationships, and they felt like very separate and alone in the matter in their psyches. So they feel like they needed to do everything on their own, and that they didn't need anybody's help, and it was going to be a much better planet than Venus was. But in their minds, they didn't know about their previous incarnations, so it was just a matter of that instilled upon their own consciousness of not wanting to be subject to the view and speculation of others, and that they're just going to be self-sufficient and whatnot. So this was happening simultaneously. The lifespan and the timeline of Mars and Venus, according to the book. And once the culture, the prominent flavor of the culture on Mars was very militaristic and masculine, dominant. Man over woman. Things that need to be accomplished and done and driven forth to come to fruition, or these instinctual desires that really drove them. And this culture was a very barbaric culture. The Martians were very angry and had a lot of distrust in their own hearts and their own minds. So this manifested in the way of really the abuse of the feminine and the abuse of women in the form of partners and being very barbaric and just completely chauvinistic, if you will, maybe possessive and sexually dominated. This episode is going to include a lot of sensitive topics, and the Mars culture represents, or the Mars colonization represents that part of us that is dominant and is basically it was a rape culture. It was the men would dominate the women. It was the man's word, and they would also dominate the kids. You know, if they wanted to rape a kid, then they would. You know, like, and they engaged in these really nasty games and events where they would show their strength and their brutalness. So, you know, gladiator type style of lifestyle. Also, like games where they like Olympic games, but much more brutal. Like, you know, sex games where how much sex you could have, and like also like just very disgusting, barbaric, like dominant. Kind of lifestyle and mindset. So, you know, they would have games where they would like see how long they could run with like a weighted vest on, and see, you know, like how they could beat or be more strong than the other in their you know, events and stuff. And that was a very prominent high esteemed accomplishment to win those games. Rather in Venus, it was more arts and craftsmanship and artisanry. The kind of hierarchy in Mars culture was based on how strong you were and your physical attributes, your physical abilities. And, you know, of course, a lot of women didn't get the chance to train and didn't get the chance to do all that because they were regarded and, you know, stigmatized as a lesser being, essentially. So, you know, you had women and I don't know, like common workers and kids and stuff. They would all like work on very meager things, while like the very strong and ambitious men were always going to continue to accomplish and do the things that they wanted to do. So moving on, this culture was very toxic. There wasn't a whole lot of like growth in population. It was a very meager, small population, and with this toxic culture, a new incarnation and wave of souls were brought in, and they were the Pleiadian emissaries of light, and they brought change. They brought change in the psyche and the subconscious within that colony, and it was boys and women who were going to stand up for themselves and others, who weren't going to continue the past hurts, traumas, and patterns, behaviors of their previous generations. So these new group of souls incarnated, and they drastically, you know, opposed this old male-dominated lifestyle, and it balanced out a little bit. So you know, the equality between men and women started to equalize, and a loving relationship was far and few between, but it would be a little bit more accepted, and you know, it'd be brushed off, and like there were still lots of games and competitions and all that stuff, but essentially the men would still go about their way in their brutal ways, but it was less, and there was a new kind of thought process within the culture of not brutalizing women, not raping women and children, and you know, just living a more peaceful and harmonious life. So once this happened between male and females, like homosexuals began to rise, and they also there's a lot of violent actions taken towards the homosexuals because of their their differences. So with this new incarnation of souls, they brought this kind of reevaluation of what it is to be in relationship with people, and they kind of cross those boundaries of male and female. So that initially was very was seen as a very bad thing, because what we don't know we condemn. So eventually, violence against homosexuals was a common theme, and they had to very much hide away and keep themselves separate from those domineering kind of violent males in the society. So in order to, there's this story that stuck out to me, is where there's a group of males that triggered another event, and the group of males one night while everyone is asleep, they knew where this homosexual couple were living. So a group of males, I don't know, maybe 10 to 10, went to the homosexual's house and their dwelling, and they essentially killed one of them, and the other one they use as a public demonstration of like some sick kind of game of dominance, and they kind of tortured him and tied him up and stuff, and they also because of their suppression, the Martian men, they suppressed their own urges and unconscious so much that because of the male that was being tortured, he defied them and he stood up to them, and because of that, they enacted and took out their frustration and sexual urges on the homosexual male that they were torturing. So they basically raped and killed him, and it was a perfect example of hypocrisy and also just like complete insanity. So that stuck out to me. Moving on, with that incident, along with a few others, there's a hierarchical intervention of instant karma. So anything the males would do, or anybody to hurt another, they would instantly be hurt back. We see a little bit of this today on an emotional level and a mental level. We do get feelings and impressions of how we display and behave to others. But in this case, in Mars, if they were to club somebody or cut somebody with a sword or axe, they themselves would be cut. So this law of instant karma prevailed over the planet for, I don't know, I think hundreds or thousands of years. I think it was like 2,000 to 5,000 years, if I'm correct. And then the evolution and healing ensue. So this looked like because they couldn't take out their frustrations on others, and they needed to heal their relationship with themselves and others, and this kind of gave birth to conscious birthing. So instead of raping and just procreating to relieve a sexual urge. It was more to bring in a new soul and bring in like a new life and a new love, essentially. So this ensued over a period of hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I'm not sure on the specifics of time. And then the final wave of Venetians reincarnate to Mars, and they still have those subconscious triggers or subconscious impressions of, you know, not being good enough and being rebellious and being completely, you know, a suppressed anger, essentially. So they come into the Mars colony, the new Mars colony, with that old sense of self. This is, of course, after all the Pleiadian emissaries of light souls were kind of spread out, and you know, this is the decline. So there was an incline, and now there's a decline, and all the Venetians reincarnate in Mars, and then suicides and violence among new reincarnations happens, and you know, there's a deep denial about the self and their own consciousness for a long time, and then they started to become a little bit more inward and thinking critically, maybe I could say, or contemplate, and they began to get their soul memories restored from Venus, and they would get impressions and psychic visions and stuff of like what life was, or you know, how they felt in other time periods and stuff like that. That, of course, goes into reincarnation, but yeah, we see that, and there's a great deal of insight that comes with that restoring of soul memories, and then the segregation of soul groups results from that, because the male-dominated way of life and lifestyle was still present, and they wanted to be in control of the women and the children and whatnot. So those soul group of people split off from the group of people who wanted to just have a harmonious, like, loving relationship with each other. And you know, those were the Venetians, and also, you know, some of them were soul star seeds and stuff. So after the soul memories were restored, then the segregation happens, and they both go their separate ways and make their own colony, whatever, and then, you know, the invention of weapons happens. There was a primitive weapons before, but this is the occurrence of like trajectories, like bows and arrows, and like you know, guns and whatnot. You know, trajectory weapons that you can throw at a distance or kill at a distance. So with that, they began to war with each other. There was a civil war that happened. So oh, let me back up 1 second. So the presiding and primary cultural lifestyle was to be in peace and harmony with one another. So they kicked out the male-dominated soul group, which wasn't much. You know, it was only you know, a couple hundred or so, and they had very few women that were willing to come with them because you know, of obviously purposes. But I didn't state that, so I'm reinstating that. And with the invention of weapons, now the migrant colonists that were kicked out previously come back and take over the original city, because of the harmonious, peace-loving kind of normal people didn't develop the weapons, and they didn't develop the necessary things to defend themselves. So they got overtaken by the rebels and the male-dominated kind of mentality, and then the Martian colony on Mars consisted of of mostly just like a very structured hierarchy of like, I'm going to dominate you, and it was back to the old ways essentially. And that Martian colony also consisted of outcasts and rebels from the Venus original colony, and they reincarnated into the soul group of Mars to do the same exact thing. So if you guys are watching this without watching the Venus episode, that will give you some insight. But that was essentially the premise. So after a couple hundred years or so of the male culture of dominance and domineering and killing and all that chauvinistic stuff, whatever, then on a subconscious level, they had no more enemies because of, it was just a very clear-cut, black and white, you against me, and I am the superior and you're the inferior. So on a subconscious level, they all attracted to themselves an opponent, in opposition. And we do that, with the law of attraction. Those of you who are familiar, we attract the things that we, on a subconscious level, need or want, desire, for our own spiritual soul growth and evolution. So with the subconscious desire to have an opponent to conquer again, because they didn't have any for a few hundred years, it triggered a connection in another star system, the Orion system, and the Lyrans from the constellation of Lyra, or the star cluster of Lyra. They were humanoids that attempted to overthrow the civilizations on Orion, and they were technologically advanced and had very advanced weaponry and stuff. So they actually failed at taking over Orion, thanks to the higher intelligence and cosmic hierarchy of those systems. So like, the interdimensional type beings kind of thwarted their efforts to take over the system. So the Lyrans from the Orion constellation invade the very meager and small Mars colony. So after that, it was an easy win because their weapons were so advanced, and they took prisoners of both men and women, and were a even more stronger force of dominance and just complete brutalness. So what ensued after that was a giant construction of pyramids, and these pyramids were designed for weaponization. They were designed to essentially they were designed to emit a huge energetic blast and energetic nuclear type of explosion to the sun, to our sun. So our sun would trigger a simultaneous kind of synchronized destruction or like alteration in a way that, you know, the Lyrans would think that would benefit them, because they were trying to take over Orion and they were still resentful and whatever, and they wanted to dominate Orion. So they built these pyramids on Mars to attack the sun, our sun right now, in order to affect the stars on Orion, because they're all quantumly entangled. Not going to get into that, but these constructions of pyramids, you know, they didn't get to fire off any of these pyramids because they were waiting till a specific alignment of planets and stars. So they were very much, you know, advanced in the way that they knew there was a certain alignment that needed to happen in order for them to commence their attack on our sun to directly affect or indirectly affect the stars and the star system of Orion. A little complicated there, but with the construction of the pyramids, the Pleiadians arrive and store peace, and the way they do this, Pleiadians and other star races, you know, they are extra dimensional, and essentially their 3D weapons and their you know, energetic particle weaponry was not effective on the Pleiadians. So the Lyrans feared them because they couldn't affect them at all. And what this eventually led to was a destruction of all weapons, a releasement of all prisoners, and where peace was restored for a few thousand years, where the Lyrans had to get along, which was very hard for the Mars colonists, and they had to learn how to forgive the Lyrans from what they did, you know, killing their family and imprisoning them, and, you know, doing all the horrible things that they did. So it was a big lesson on each of their parts, and they had to learn how to live in peace. You know, the Lyrans did. So this was friction, and there was surface tension on this, and unconsciousness ensued, because there were still the Lyrans and those very few Mars people who didn't know how to manage their emotional integrity and their anger, and they still had this complex of domination and superiority. So what happens next after the peace is restored and there's a balance? There's a separation again, because of those Lyrans and very few Mars colonists want to dominate still, and they split up from the colony that this is a course of thousands of years. So they split up eventually into separate colonies, and the original city also divides, because not only does the Lyran and warmongering kind of civilization split up from the original, but the original divides because of internal issues and dynamics of you know, spiritual and evolutionary growth, because there was a lot of people who wanted to become spiritually evolved and listen to the teachings of the Pleiadians and teachings of the star people who are inter and extra dimensional, and they put down all their weapons, put down everything aside, because they wanted to focus their entire lives on evolutionary growth. And there was temples, you know, all these things for the council and healing of the planet as well as the people. So it was another segregation where those very spiritually minded people stayed in their original colony, and there was an offshoot of that original colony that sprung, you know, these people that weren't as violent and destructive as the Lyrans, but didn't want to progress spiritually. So you had this weird three-fold kind of level of spiritual advancement, and also dominance over the other kind of ego psychological mindset in the psyches and the consciousness of those groups of people. And mind you, all of those groups were very specific soul groups of incarnations of people over the thousands and tens of thousands of years that the Mars colony was developed. So the Lyrans, some of them stayed. I'm going to back up a little bit. Some of the Lyrans that were kicked out initially from the original city thousands of years ago, stepping back a little bit, they actually left the planet, and they were waiting for that alignment to happen, so that they could attack the Orion system again with their weapons that they constructed on Mars. And so the Lyran invaders that left actually come back thousands of years later, and with more technological advancement and a higher number of people take over, because over the course of the division of the cities, there was a balancing and restoring of peace, but there wasn't a whole lot of technological advancement in that time, and there's a focus on spiritual and also just like ego advancement, and they didn't get outside or new ideas to evolve their consciousness and whatnot. So the Lyran and Orion invaders came back, took over the planet because the Pleiadians and the star people left during this evolutionary cycle of about 5,200 years, and then fired off their weapons that they constructed through the pyramids. And through the firing of that, with the alignment of the planets and all the things that they were waiting for, it triggered a atmospheric destruction from the power of these pyramids and their weapons, and essentially it just vaporized all life and within the atmosphere of Mars, and that's why today is just a desolate planet, and it just completely wiped out all life, and that is essentially the it for the colonization and presence